Okay, another edition of Riding Home. Dean Legge and Matt DeBary. Matt, we're going to talk about something that you and I did not talk about earlier, and that's if Kirby Smart is a top 10 coach or not. Should be a pretty easy.
It he is. I know where you're going with this. I know
Okay.
what you wrote, which was a great story. If you're listening to this, check that out on Dog Post. But one of the other guys on one of the other sites, pretty smart, not a top 10 coach in the country. I just started drinking my coffee, almost spit it out everywhere because it's ridiculous, Dean. Um, I mean, the guy just played for a national championship a few years ago. I get it. Georgia hasn't won a national title. That's going to be hanging over his head, until he wins one. I get it. But we don't have to make this thing every offseason. Hey, a year where Kirby Smart is not as good as everyone thought he was. I mean, he was the right hire. That's clear. And Georgia's knocking on that door of winning it. We've been talking about it for a while now. That doesn't mean he's not one of the top coaches in the country now, Dean.
Well, I mean, Ryan Day hasn't won it. He certainly is a top 10 coach. Dan Mullen was
Yep.
listed in here. I don't know why. Well, we're talking about a story from Rivals.com that Mike Farrell wrote. And I guess I would say it's a curious discussion of naming everyone who's won a national championship and then putting Mario Cristobal in there, which that gave me, I don't know about that. And then I mean, it used to be that James Franklin was in this group. It used to be that I think at least for some time that Harbaugh was in this group. But to leave Kirby out, and I do wonder, Matt, what happens here because Kirby certainly rubs people the wrong way. He rubs me the wrong way sometimes, but I guess I just don't understand. Like I would not put Ed Orgeron in front of Kirby Smart personally, and I'm not asking you to agree with everything I say here. I think Lincoln Riley is outstanding. I think Ryan Day is very good. I think what Mac Brown has done at Carolina solidifies how
Mhm.
good Mac Brown is. But like, does Mike Farrell have something against Kirby? Like, what's his problem here? I don't get that.
It's click season, and one way to
Yes.
trigger Georgia fan is to say stuff like this. And of course, it got us talking. Thankfully for Mike Farrell, said something dumb to give us something to talk about and write about. But I mean, at this point, I think he's just fishing for some attention or some clicks for rivals. But what he said is just wrong, and it's a take. And but it got them attention. Obviously, there's a lot of people. Hey, did you see that crazy comments that Mike Farrell made about Kirby? But I don't know. It's a little too hot of a take. It's
Yeah.
almost too hot for it to be like it's just crazy.
What now? Explain to me what a hot take is. What is a hot take
Hot take is
supposed?
something that might be true that some people agree with that most people wouldn't. This is a crazy take because it's not true.
Don't you think Dan
Hot take
Mullen?
would
I'm sorry, Matt. Don't you think Dan Mullen's a good coach?
yes, Dan Mullen, a good football coach.
How
I'd agree
about
there.
how about I mean Ed Orgeron is a good coach.
Yes, yes. Would you rather have Ed Orgeron than 10 years or Kirby Smart though?
No, I would rather have Kirby. I
Yeah, I
mean,
think most would.
I think Dan Mullen's a really good coach. I think I don't know if he's a good fit at Florida or not, but um, I don't know after a while. I mean, it just it seems to me like um, well, a little bit. This is what we do. Like when Clemson is not going to win a national championship for a few years, Dabo Swinney is going to eat some turds for a while. And when
Yeah.
Nick Saban doesn't do that, that'll happen to him too. Jimbo Fisher's been a good coach for sure. Um, I don't. I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, Brian Kelly's a good coach too. I'm just not sure I would put Brian Kelly in front of Kirby either. I mean, what has Brian Kelly done that Kirby hasn't? I mean,
I mean,
Brian Kelly
Kirby's 2
hasn't.
and 0
Yeah, I mean,
against
Brian Kelly
Brian
hasn't
Kelly.
beaten Kirby. I mean, does it matter if they win or not? I mean, because Dan Mullen is 1-3 against Kirby Smart. Brian
Yeah.
Kelly 0-2. Lincoln Riley has lost. Jimbo Fisher has lost. They're both 0-1. And one game doesn't make it. One season doesn't make it. But honestly, the LSU national championship in 2019, that's going to save Ed Orgeron for a while. Well, say it's going to save him for a while. I don't know that it barely saved him in 2020. But I would not exchange Ed Orgeron for Kirby Smart. Period. I mean, and that doesn't mean I think
Well,
Ed
you have
Orgeron's
to,
bad.
but there always seems to be some off the field concerns with his team and his players sometimes, which
You're talking about at LSU. There are off the field issues at LSU. Period. I mean, like that whole
yeah,
institution has
yeah,
issues right now. Go ahead.
yeah. So that always kind of might linger over Ed Orgeron a little bit, but the national title will save any coach for a few years, and it's going to for him as well. But we've seen, what LSU is without a quarterback again, and without a no who is doing this in the NFL now. He had a lot of pieces there,
Oh
and
yeah.
end up being one of the best teams in the country. But um, I'm not putting Brian Kelly over Kirby Smart. Lincoln Riley hasn't played in a college football national championship, hasn't had a Final Four win. A Final Four is huge in basketball. Should be the same way in football. You should get points for making it to the playoff. Kirby Smart's done that. He's won in the playoff, and we know what happened in the national championship game. But again, I cover recruiting, so I have to look at it from an aspect too. You ask Kirby's staff what half the job is, they might say it's
Oh
recruiting.
yeah. It's at
And that's
least
what Kirby
half.
Smart does too. How is Kirby Smart not in the top 10 when he is one of the best recruiters? And I that they haven't won a national championship with it, but he recruits at a top 3 level and he's built a top 5
Well,
program out of it.
Ohio State hasn't won the national championship lately either. I
Yeah.
mean,
So
don't. I
the
mean,
whole
Ryan.
argument of Kirby Smart does less with more is just crazy to me.
Well, Ohio State didn't win the national championship with Justin Fields. I mean, and I'm not knocking Justin. He played great, dude. I mean, if we're gonna do this routine, I mean, college. You talk about Trevor Lawrence walking on water. They won one national championship with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, and now that will come back to be critical of Dabo over time. That's what's going to happen. They're going to say you had two of the best quarterbacks in the recent college football history, and they were your starter for 5 years, and you only won two national championships. But
Yeah.
that's unfair too, because when you think about what Mac Brown did at Texas and only winning one national championship with Vince Young, or Miami with the possibility of winning a couple of national championships with that dynamic group of players, and they got one national championship stolen from them. But when you think about that time, Tua Tagovailoa never won the national championship as a starting quarterback. That's crazy, but it's true. He didn't
Yeah.
even play for the SEC championship one year as a starter. So, you get credit for what you get, what you win. And look, nobody is Nick Saban, and that I think that's what's getting that the more than anything, that is what Kirby is being judged against, and I think that is overdone because and I've used this example a lot lately, which is that Clemson can't help the conference they play in, but they can help how they play when they play in big games. And honestly, the last few times they've played in big games, they've gotten their ass beat. I mean, I'll give them 3 of the last 4 times they've played games that were important games, they've lost. They haven't gotten their ass beat. They got lost. The LSU championship game they were destroyed. Lost to Notre Dame in overtime. We didn't have Trevor Lawrence. Okay, well, you lost. And then they get Trevor. They win the game against Notre Dame, and they got absolutely destroyed by Ohio State. But that's going to become a thing if they lose to Georgia. I mean, that's going to be one of these things again. I mean, you're only as good as your most recent thing. And for Kirby, they haven't won the national championship, and that's what people are thumping over the head about. And by the way, we have to be able to use critical thinking. Two things can be true at the same time. I mean, he should win the national championship. I'm not sure if he should have won one in the first 5 years or not, but he should certainly win one in the next 5 years. If he doesn't, then there's a problem. Now, with that said, these guys, I mean, it's Mike Farrell. It's not just Mike Farrell. Mike Farrell is kind of an old time, I don't know. I don't know the guy. I never met him, I don't think. So I don't. We've both been in the industry for a very long time. But this is not a unique take. But Kirby Smart's been the head coach at Georgia for 5 seasons, Matt. The 35 years before that, I mean, Kirby wasn't the head coach when Jim Don and Ray Goff and Vince Dooley were the coaches, or Mark Richt. I mean, shit, he was the one that called the play in 2012 to stop Georgia from winning the national championship. You can't bury Kirby. You can't put all of the 40 years on Kirby. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, I think like you said, the middle of the 40-year drought was what 20
20 years
ago,
ago.
and the program was completely different. But this is as close as Georgia. We keep talking about this is the glory years where
Oh
Georgia's
yeah.
consistently entering the season as a national championship threat, and then to come out and say, well, he's not even a top 10 coach, even though he's recruiting at an elite level. Yeah, I mean, it's just a funny. I don't even want to call it a take again, but it's just. I
I
mean,
did.
is that
If you
today's
read,
media? Is that what we're doing? I mean,
yeah, and then when you say media, that triggers some people because and I just like, but there is a part of our industry that um, basically is looking for is having look at me moments. Like I know that because I spent 17 years with a network. I know how these things go. But you do have to be honest with your audience. I mean, like, if you want to have the argument that Dan Mullen's a top 10 coach, I mean, I don't know that that's a crazy argument necessarily. I mean, I'm trying to think off my top of my head who is certainly better than Dan Mullen. I mean, I would say certainly Nick Saban. I would put Les Miles. I mean, excuse me, Lincoln Riley in front of him, and Ryan Day. I would put Kirby in front of him. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I mean, I would almost
well,
put him
real
in.
quick.
Go ahead.
Well, they lost 4 games last year,
Well, they
right?
lost 4 games.
And we're still talking about him being a good coach, which means like it's the eye test. We know he's a good coach, even though he did lose 4 games
Right.
last year. But if Kirby loses 4 games,
Which he's
I
never
people
done.
are gonna say start calling him to be on the hot seat, this and that.
Right.
So I mean, you have to be real all the way around. Dan Mullen is a good coach. Yes, he lost 4 games, but you turn the tables around, and no one would ever say Kirby Smart's a good coach if he loses 4 games.
Yeah, I mean, the only time Kirby lost 4 games or more was his first season at Georgia. And I think what was disturbing about what happened at Florida this past season was, the end of the year. Losing 3 straight games. I mean, losing to Alabama, LSU, and Oklahoma. I really don't think there's anything, you know, problematic with that. It was the way in which they lost 2 of those 3 games. They really competed against Alabama, but that loss to LSU was as inexplicable as I could imagine. And then, but the
Yeah.
Oklahoma, it was the Oklahoma loss. I mean, it was just like what not just the loss, man. It was the way in which they went about it. His post game was bizarre.
Yeah. I didn't expect them to win that game because they had nothing
I didn't either,
to
but
play for, but they should have played with some heart, and they didn't, and they did kind of roll over, and you could tell they did not want to be there, and it's not a good look for their program. It's not a good look for the SEC. It's not a good look for Mullen. But at the end of the day, I do still think he's a good coach,
I would think he's a top
but
10 coach, don't you? I mean, I'm trying to.
yeah,
I haven't written this down, or anything like that. I mean, I think it's Nick Saban and everybody else. I'm sorry, it's just what it is, and
100%.
I don't, I don't know, man. I mean, like Jimbo. Um,
Yeah, I didn't see his list or anything. I didn't know if he listed a top 10 in order or anything like
yeah,
that,
he
or
went
just
in order. He
yeah.
went. He put Jimbo number 3. I think you have to put.
Jimbo's a good
He
coach.
is a good coach. I think you have
I
to
don't know if
put.
he'll ever win it at Texas A&M, but he's a good coach.
I think you have to put Dabo number 2 simply because he's won 2 national championships. I would not put him number 2 personally, but that's me. Uh, but I mean, I don't see how you can not put him at number 2. With that said, the gap between number 2 and 3 is not the gap between number 1 and 2. Alabama is not, and nobody's like them right now. And I do think that right now, what we do naturally is because Alabama and Georgia have played 3 times in 4 seasons, and Georgia has lost all 3 of those games twice while I don't know about dominating, but certainly being in firm control of the games. That the judgment for Georgia losing to Alabama is not the same as the judgment for Texas A&M, Clemson, um, I guess Auburn. I mean, Auburn gets murdered by Alabama sometimes,
Yeah.
and we don't see that sort of judgment. And basically, what people say is, oh well, Kirby can't do it. He's got all the guys, he can't do it. Well, I mean,
He hasn't done it. Not he
he
can't.
needs to
He
do
just
it.
hasn't. He
Well,
needs to do it.
I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't say that Notre Dame can't win the national championship. I certainly wouldn't say that about Ohio State or Oklahoma. Um, and that those things haven't happened with the current head coaches. I mean, I think Ohio State's going to win the national championship at some point. I think Georgia will. I think Oklahoma will. I will say I think Oklahoma is I think I don't know why I think Georgia and Ohio State would do it before Oklahoma necessarily because Oklahoma's path is a lot easier, but I do think they will. It stands and I think I'm right for thinking that. Look at Oklahoma, man. I mean they're doing fine.
Do you have to have an elite quarterback to
I think you
win the
do.
national title?
Yeah, I think you do, and I think that do you really think that Dabo Swinney is gonna win a national championship without Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson? Because I mean, we haven't seen that yet. And then the quarterback they got right now could certainly be good enough to do it. What he's done well is recruiting quarterbacks. What Kirby's done well is recruit quarterbacks. The difference between Dabo and Kirby has been the path to the championship and the fact that he's the clearness of the way the quarterbacks have been used at Clemson. Dabo had to decide between Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant. Kelly Bryant's not
Easy
good.
decision.
And Kelly Bryant's not good.
Yeah.
So then we fall into this false narrative, this lack of understanding about Justin Fields and Jake Fromm, and then you just slowly see, blood coming out of my ears. It's but you going back to recruiting, you've seen, the way they've recruited. They've got a 5-star kid right now. They've got a high 4-star kid coming after that. After that, there's a 5-star kid. After that's a 5-star kid. Georgia's going to have their quarterback. That's why I think probably more than any other time since Aaron or Matthew that they will win the national championship. But they got to do it. I mean, nobody going to give it to them.
No. And I think Georgia has an easier path for that. Texas needs to go and get their 5-star quarterback if they want to make a run. Notre Dame has to do a little better than Ian Book. I know you're an Ian Book guy, but
well,
when
he's
you're
not.
talking about
Ian Book is not Trevor, and he's not Justin.
right. If you're talking about Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Mac Jones, those are three. Two of them are going to be the number 1 overall pick. Mac Jones might still be a first rounder. You need one of those guys to win it all. And Georgia could have that guy on its roster. Texas doesn't. I don't know if Southern Cal does. Notre Dame, some of these bigger programs. If Ohio State has it right now. But again, you have to have one of those guys. It seems, in today's era of college football to win the whole thing. And I think Georgia has that right now more than a few of these other programs who are trying to get there.
Well, their quarterback situation is laid out better now than it ever has been at Georgia. We know that looking backwards because we know what happened with Jacob Eason. I think that this is a season where Kirby, I think if they don't win it all, it's hard to criticize someone for not winning the national championship. I mean, like you look back, again, go back to the Clemson thing. This was an okay year for Clemson. I don't think it was a year that was great. And that shows how high that they've elevated themselves. But I don't know if they could have won the national championship this year, man. I think they were probably the 3rd or 4th best team in the country. And they were really not close to number 1 and 2, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But we didn't know that coming into the season when they were ranked number 1. And, this is a Georgia season that they're going to have a shot at it. When you look at this Georgia schedule after the Clemson game, I mean, is Florida going to be a top 10 team?
I don't think so. They could be coming into that game at Jacksonville with 2 losses.
The Gators?
Well,
they got Alabama.
And I think
yeah.
And so if they're going into Jacksonville with 2 losses, Georgia has none. I mean, their season is on the line. Well, it is for both teams every year. The season is on the line, but their season could be, almost over completely already.
Yeah.
I don't know if a 2-loss Florida team is going to beat an undefeated Georgia if, Georgia's good enough to beat Clemson and continue winning until Jacksonville. That's going to be really tough. I don't know what Florida's going to do at quarterback. We both think that Emory Jones is going to be the answer. I think they like the Richardson kid. That they've got who's younger than Emory Jones, but see anyone on their roster at quarterback who is going to have some Kyle Trask type of year, especially throwing the ball.
I don't know if they'll lose to LSU. We'll see. That game's in Baton Rouge. I mean, LSU should be better. But I mean, they're not. I mean, I'd be very surprised if they beat Alabama week
Yeah.
3 or whatever it will be. I mean, Alabama's. I mean, everybody coming into this season. That's week 3 for the Gators. Everybody coming into this year has got issues. I think, though, to me, though, circling back, you know, you don't want to call Kirby a top 10 coach. I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, that's a little bit of a little stretchy for me, but I don't know.
It's a big stretch. That's Stretch Armstrong. It is. That's Stretch Armstrong. It's crazy, but this is the off season. It's what we do. We make lists. We get our takes out there, and this one was as hot as I've seen in a while because it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to put him in over Mario. Mario Cristobal has a losing record as a head coach, and understand some of that was at Florida International. But I mean, you said the top 10 coaches. You know, why don't you just put Jeremy Pruitt in there? You know, I mean, it's got to make sense. If you want to talk about what coaches have done at places, I think Kentucky is an example of a coach doing a really, really good job. I'm trying to think. Can you think of other sort of value plays? Cincinnati for sure. Excuse me.
The guy at Iowa State.
Yes. Why was he not in there? I mean, really?
The guy at Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, but dude, come on with the coastal stuff. Oh, God.
That was just to trigger you.
No, I mean, like, listen, I understand Coastal. They've won a baseball national championship in recent memory. I get all that, but, like, it's not the same. Are we talking simply about the best coach? Or, I mean, you say coach, that means the person's got to win. And, like,
yeah,
that guy's done a good job at Coastal, but, I mean, like, come on, you know.
Could he coach in the SEC one day?
I'm sure he
I have
could.
no idea.
No, we don't know. I'm sure he could.
Yeah, we don't. But
we can't know what we don't know. But like, this is sort of big boy stuff. Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. I think you could make the argument, but Pat Fitzgerald ain't never winning the national championship not at Northwestern. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Scott Frost. We're gonna talk about how great Scott Frost is at Nebraska.
The guy at Washington, Peterson. He's always good. Not great.
He's retired. Thanks for watching college football.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, clearly, it's time for us to stop this segment. Thanks for watching. We'll see you over on the website. Stay tuned to dogpost.com.